was an accomplished stockbroker and land speculator. Cassatt's mother, Catherine Kelso Johnston, was a well-educated woman who came from a family of bankers. Because her father did well at his business, and because travel was considered vital to a proper education at the time, the Cassatts traveled abroad when Mary was a youth. So during their journeys outside of the States, young Mary was exposed to the art and culture of Europe and became fluent in French and German at a young age. She had 6 other siblings, sadly 2 passed away in childbirth, and was closest to her older sister, Lydia. As it was common at the time, many young women learned to paint as a social skill, but hardly saw this as a career choice. Mary Cassatt was different. She was an exceptional artist, even early on, and decided that when she was a teenager, she wanted to further her education in art to earn a living from it. Her family, especially her father, were very unhappy with her decision to become a professional artist. However, the determined young Mary would not budge on her dreams, and her parents reluctantly agreed to let her explore and learn art. Starting in 1860, when she was 15, Cassatt attended the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Unfortunately for Mary, she was unable to obtain the kind of education she desired from this institution. She was unhappy with the way the male students were educated versus the female students. She believed they received more opportunities and support than her peers and her female peers. Also, as a female student, she was not allowed to practice drawing from live models, and most of her training simply involved drawing from cast. I found this excellent engraving here. This is not the school she went to, this is another school, but this is probably what the classroom environment looked like at that time. So Mary craved the kind of education that would push her to perfect her abilities and help her grow into a strong and talented artist. When she eventually grew weary of the academy after a couple years, she asked her parents to let her pursue her education in Paris. Though still far from satisfied with her choice of careers, her parents obliged, and in 1866, Cassatt moved to France. Although she was a gifted artist, Cassatt could not apply to be accepted to the famous École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. As a woman, she was not allowed to attend until quite a bit later, so they did not start accepting women into this academy until 1897. She was, however, able to circumvent this obstacle by being accepted to study with the renowned French painter and sculptor Jean-Léon Gérôme. So he was an instructor at the institution, but he agreed to take her on as a pupil. So through his instruction, she learned more of the understanding and principles needed to produce fine academic art. In 1866, Cassatt also joined an art class taught by the French artist Charles Joshua Chaplin, so he was known for his beautiful and idyllic portraits. The academic education that Cassatt received was enhanced by also learning from a few other skilled artists, notably Thomas Couture. It's a beautiful piece right there. Pierre-Edouard Frère, and Paul Constant Soyer. And you'll see the influence of these artists on her works here shortly. When she wasn't learning directly from an instructor, Cassatt was often copying artwork at the Louvre, which she had to obtain a copyist license in order to do so. So Cassatt studied and worked relentlessly to become a strong and skilled artist. Unfortunately for her, her time learning and practicing art in France was interrupted when she had to move back to the States in 1870 to escape the Franco-Prussian War. While back home with her family in Pennsylvania, Cassatt became increasingly frustrated with the lack of what she considered was great art to study and learn from. So we know Europe had these older art institutions that had been established for hundreds of years at this point. In the United States, it was still relatively new. So she didn't have the Louvre to study from, and the United States didn't have what it has now. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, for example, didn't open until 1870. So Cassatt did try to sell some of her work while in the States and was able to place a couple of her paintings in galleries in New York, but unfortunately they did not sell. They were good, but people just weren't interested in them. She tried selling them in Chicago, but unfortunately the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 claimed some of her art. So this misfortune, combined with the fact that her art, although good, was not selling as she had hoped, caused Cassatt to momentarily second-guess becoming an artist. Earlier, when I discussed Cassatt's family and background, I mentioned she came from a considerably well-to-do, wealthy family. Although her parents paid for and provided her basic necessities and schooling, her father was firm that any art supplies, materials, and studio space that she desired had to be paid by her. She felt like she wasn't on the path to succeed as an artist at this point, because how was she going to buy materials to create art when she wasn't selling any art? But she was still determined to be an independent woman. And thought maybe she should try her luck elsewhere. She was actually thinking of moving out west. I believe one reason that Cassatt tried so hard to be seen as self-reliant and independent was often because she was overshadowed by the achievements of her other siblings, notably her older brother Alexander, who she did this lovely portrait of here with his son later on. He actually served as president of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company during his life, and her parents were always extremely proud of him, so she always felt like she was in his shadow. Well, fortunately, in 1871, Cassatt was provided an opportunity that was perfect for her. She was commissioned by the Archbishop of Pittsburgh to travel to Parma, Italy, to create 2 copies of paintings by Antonio da Correggio. So this is one of the paintings that she was paid to copy. This change of fortune provided Cassatt with the means to get back to Europe to continue creating. In contrast to her experience in the United States, Cassatt did very well in Italy and was provided ample encouragement and support by the arts community there. So here's an example of her work from this time, and you can see the influence from the teachers that she learned from in this beautiful traditional classical style painting here. So after a couple of years of learning and working in Italy, Cassatt traveled to Spain, Belgium, and Holland in 1873. During this time, she studied and copied, like many great artists did, the works of the old masters, so Diego Velázquez, Peter Paul Rubens, and Frans Hals. While studying the old masters, she continued to create realistic academic style paintings. So here's one after the bullfight, which was inspired by her time in Spain. Actually, I think all of these are, but we'll go on to the next one here. This is a beautiful one, a balcony in Seville. You'd never think that by looking at these that they were, Mary Cassatt paintings. And then we have Spanish dancer wearing a lace mantilla. So following this productive period of travel around Europe, Cassatt made up her mind to return to France and decided to stay in Paris in 1874. Cassatt continued her academic style paintings in Paris, and like many artists who wanted recognition at the time, submitted them regularly to the famous Paris Salon. Her first painting was actually accepted before she settled in Paris, so while she was in the States and in Europe, she would still submit art. So this was in 1868, titled The Mandolin Player. Is a great example of her demonstrating the skills she acquired from traditional academic painters. Cassatt would continue to submit her paintings, and she was included in 7 more salons she was submitted to. So we have this one, 2 women throwing flowers during carnival. And then we have offering the panau to the bullfighter. However, Cassatt grew continuously frustrated with how she felt that female artists were perceived and treated by the Salon committee. Adding to this frustration was the rejection of her paintings that were less academic in style. For example, this painting here, excuse me, this painting here, 2 women seated by woodland stream. I'm sorry, this one here was also accepted to the Salon. So you can see the way these paintings are, how they're similar to each other, versus this one here, which actually looks more like an Impressionist work. She was just trying something new, but it was rejected. So Cassatt was determined to be taken seriously as an artist, and she was not willing to try to make friends or court favor with anyone associated with the salon in order to be seen in a favorable way. She also desired the freedom to learn and grow as an artist, to try new things while still being seen as dedicated and determined to her craft. The year 1877 would bring about a couple of major changes in Cassatt's life. That year, her parents and her sister Lydia left their life in the United States to join Mary in Paris. This was not unusual, as Paris had hundreds of Americans move there after the Civil War. They had actually quite a large expatriate community. After they had joined her, Cassatt frequently painted her family members, most notably her mother, who was often reading Le Figaro, a conservative newspaper, and her sister Lydia, who she was particularly close to. So Lydia was only about 7 years older than Mary, and they were very similar in personalities. The same year, French artist Edgar Degas invited her to join him and the Impressionists, a group of independent artists who sought freedom from the rules set forth by traditional academic style art. So Cassatt and Degas knew of each other's art before they ever met in person. Cassatt had seen Degas' exquisite pastels in an art dealer's window in Paris in 1875. I couldn't find exactly what pastels, but they're probably similar to these. So we have his racehorses, which he did a lot of wonderful pictures of. And then we have, of course, the ballerinas. So she thought very highly of his art before having met him. About his pastels, she wrote, "I used to go and flatten my nose against the window and absorb all I could of his art. It changed my life. I saw art then as I wanted to see it." So Degas experienced a mutual appreciation of Cassatt's art. He saw her painting, an expressive portrait titled Ida, at the Paris Salon of 1874. Though her work was still then displaying more of an academic approach, at that time he remarked to a friend, "There is someone who feels like I do." And the two artists were introduced in 1877 by Joseph Gabriel Tourny, an artist who was already familiar with Degas and who Cassatt had met while she was in Belgium in 1873. In 1877, Cassatt's submitted painting was rejected by the Salon, and Degas invited her to show her art instead with him and the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Printmakers, better known as the Impressionists. Though they had differing styles and subjects, the Impressionists created art that was characterized by visible brushstrokes, unblended colors, and accurate depictions of natural sunlight. When Degas offered her to have her join, she readily agreed and was very excited to work with a group of avant-garde and independent artists. In a letter from the time, she wrote, "I submitted again. They rejected it. That was when Degas made me a promise never to submit anything to the Salon again and to exhibit with his friends and the group of Impressionists. I agreed gladly. At last, I could work absolutely independently without worrying about the possible opinion of a jury." It was this freedom that Cassatt craved and needed in order to advance her art. In the Impressionists, she found a group of gifted, hardworking, risk-taking, artistic individuals who challenged the academic machine that she had grown disillusioned with. In Degas, she had found an artist as equally as passionate as herself, who would push Cassatt to her limits to help her on her path to becoming the best artist she could be. He was also someone who would provide honest feedback, not always the best, but honest, resources, and support. It was easy to see why Degas was attracted to her art and asked her to join the Impressionists. Both he and Cassatt were interested in creating subjects with dynamic and asymmetrical compositions which had involved contemporary subjects. So besides their similar views on art, Degas and Cassatt had quite a bit in common. They came from similar backgrounds, were both very well educated, and traveled in the same upper class social circles. Cassatt unfortunately could not fraternize with Degas and his other male Impressionist contemporaries at the cafes they frequented in Paris. It wasn't considered proper behavior for a respectable woman at this time. So instead, they frequently spent time in each other's studios, which are not far apart, to discuss art and artistic processes. They would also visit public places together like the Louvre, with Cassatt's sister Lydia accompanying them. So I found a set of art that Degas created while they were visiting the Louvre. So he enjoyed drawing and sketching Mary. So it's an incomplete set of drawings and etchings I thought were really nice and I wanted to share. So often in the same poses while she was just looking at art there. This is an etching. And then we have, so basically the same one here, but this one's pastel on paper. So if you know Degas' art, he was a little, I'd say, obsessive about his subjects. He wouldn't really do one image of one subject. He would do multiple images of one subject. I mean, how many ballerina paintings and drawings does he have? How many horse race ones? So he kind of did the same with Cassatt. So it was during the late 1870s that Cassatt started to experiment more and more with her art and her artistic style. So in this one, she actually added metallic paints to her artwork, which were more reserved for decorative painting at that time. She wanted to see how it would look. So this is a pastel with gold metallic paint on canvas. She would start to embrace more of the Impressionist style, showing more of her brushwork, brightening her color palette, and bringing more light into her paintings. She still created genre paintings, but now it was of women reading, like this one here, or women at the opera. This is actually a portrait of her sister Lydia there. Paintings of upper-class, educated, and fashionable Parisian women. In 1879, Cassatt made her first appearance showing with the Impressionists. She showcased works in her newer style, such as the wonderfully candid little girl in a blue armchair, so one of her more famous paintings. So this one, there's actually quite an interesting article that the National Gallery of Art wrote about. So they were cleaning this painting and they decided to X-ray it, and they believed that Degas had helped Cassatt with some compositional structures in this painting. So when they X-rayed it, you could see that there was a flat line painted in the back that went behind the chairs, and instead they believe he created a corner in the room which allowed her composition to be more dynamic. The little girl in the painting here, that's one of Edgar Degas' friend's daughters. And the little dog here, that is actually Cassatt's dog named Baptiste. It's a Brussels Griffon dog. And she had also moved the position of the dog because the dog was originally on the floor between all the furniture, and then she had moved it to the chair. But this is the kind of painting that Cassatt would be known for, just these candid images of domestic life. And I love that this little girl just looks like totally bored and is like, okay, yeah, whatever, just get on with it. But it's a really wonderful painting. And she would also paint images like this, the stylish but solemn woman with a fan. Though she, of course, did receive some negative comments from some art critics and viewers, and I say of course because it seems to have been a normal rite of passage for the group of independent artists, she did also receive some praise and was gaining recognition as a serious artist. So on the whole, the 1879 Impressionist exhibition was considered a success for her and the other artists involved. And Cassatt would continue to work with and exhibit with the group 3 more times, so also in 1880, 1881, and 1886. Shortly following the success of the 1879 Impressionist exhibition, Degas went on to teach Cassatt etching and printmaking. And he invited her, along with some other Impressionist artists, to contribute to a journal of artistic prints that he planned to create. Unfortunately, the journal, which was to be called Le Jour et la Nuit, meaning the day and the night, excuse my terrible French, was made to highlight the contrast of light and shadow in the works. So unfortunately, it was never published, which was a real disappointment for Cassatt, but she really leaned into printmaking. She really took it on as another medium. So this was a print that she had made. So from her previous painting, she took some inspiration from that, called In the Opera Box, number 2. So this is etching an aqua tint on paper. So despite this journal not being published, she continued to learn and practice printmaking and became quite adept at this form of art. So aside from printmaking, we know Degas was an inspiration to Cassatt with his pastels, and we know he was a master in this medium that was gaining popularity in the late 1800s. Cassatt, who seemed to quickly pick up whatever medium she tried, became very skilled in her use of pastels. She found that through this medium, she could quickly and accurately capture subjects, especially children, which she had to draw fast because they're often impatient and moved around a lot. I don't know if any of you have ever tried drawing kids, but I can say that for a fact, it's not easy. So Cassatt created a number of beautiful and increasingly realistic pastel drawings during her career. So this is one from 1879. And I like that she pays a lot of attention to features such as the hands and face, but the rest of it's kind of loose, but it goes very well together. So this is a very realistic one from 1889, and she continued to use pastels throughout her career. Here's another one from 1914. So though she excelled in creating prints and making pastel drawings, Cassatt worked primarily with oil paint throughout her time as a professional artist. In the 1880s, she continued to paint scenes of high society women at the opera, but now incorporated more paintings of other daily activities in the lives of upper-class women. For example, there's her sister Lydia again. Women enjoyed the park. This was one place where it was okay for women to hang out. So often women were accompanying each other, but the park was seen as a perfectly normal and respectable place for them to enjoy. Or women having tea. Of course, that was very popular. The woman on the left here is also her sister Lydia. And socializing. During this time, she also started to paint the subject she would best be known for, candid scenes of mothers and children, which she painted beautifully and accurately. It was interesting for me to learn that Cassatt never married or had any children. She had made the decision early on in her life never to marry, believing that having a husband and children would impede her career as an artist. Perhaps she was right. She did enjoy her life as an independent artist, and if she decided to marry and start a family, there would be certain societal expectations she would need to fulfill. Nevertheless, I believe she could have accomplished being a successful mother and an artist like the other female impressionists, Berthe Morisot. So here is Berthe, and after Berthe had her child, Julie, she often used Julie as a subject in her art. Sadly, she passed away when Julie was 16, but she did create a number of beautiful portraits of her before she had died. So ultimately, Cassatt did not believe it was the right path for her. Still, you would never think it by looking at her art. The way she captures the love and tenderness between mothers and children, she makes you believe that she has experienced that feeling for herself. Cassatt was excellent at observations, at capturing these scenes of domestic life in an authentic manner. Cassatt's sister Lydia was similar in that she had also not married or started a family. Possibly this is why the two were very close to each other as they spent much of their time together. Cassatt valued her sister's companionship and was extremely devastated by her death in 1882, with Lydia ultimately succumbing to what was then called Bright's disease. So it's now known as nephritis, which is an inflammation of the kidneys, and it can have many causes. So unfortunately, during Lydia's time, during this time, doctors didn't really know what it was, and they tried to treat it with a number of different things, and they just never really worked for her. So she spent a lot of her life just being in this kind of, unfortunately, sickly state, and trying different treatments in Europe, but nothing worked, and she succumbed at age 45. So the death of someone she loved dearly caused an understandable pause in her career. However, it is nice to think of the legacy that Mary left behind for her sister, the beautiful and precise portrait showing a serious but delicate and dedicated sister. One thing I believe Cassatt was looking to portray in her art was the truth as she observed and experienced it, the reality of being a woman in her social class during that time. Unfortunately, she was occasionally criticized for being what some called too honest with her art. So not showing women and children as idealized, but rather as they are in the moment. with unflattering angles and features. She didn't believe there was any injustice in this, only sincerity in how depicting what she actually saw, how life actually was around her. This insight into the lives of women was something that set her apart from her male contemporaries. The access she had into this world and the glimpses she gave the viewers allowed Cassatt to be earnest and show women how she viewed them. Strong, independent, educated, loving, nurturing, and as caregivers for the next generation. So there is a beautiful set of etchings that I discovered while researching this that Cassatt created from 1890 to 1891 that reveal this intimate look into the lives of women from this time. This series of 10 prints made using a combination of etching, aquatint, dry point, and hand coloring were displayed at her first solo exhibition held at Galerie Durand Riel in Paris in 1891. So we have, here we have the bath and mother's kiss. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with printmaking, but the process that she used here, it wasn't very forgiving if you made a mistake. So it actually taught her how to improve on her draftsmanship skills in art. So she became very good and adept at that. So here we have the bath, a mother about to wash her child, and then a mother's kiss, which maybe looks like a scene before or after the bath. But both very wonderful moments here. So the subject ranged from interactions between mothers and children to daily activities for women, such as bathing. So we have another one here of a mother and child maternal caress, woman bathing. Woman bathing, I absolutely love the pattern on the floor there and the pattern of the woman's dress. So we have women styling their hair, traveling, so what was known as an omnibus during this time. And in an analysis I saw the omnibus, it looks like the woman on the left with the fancier hat is the mother, while the woman on the right is the nanny who's taking care of the child while they travel together. We have other activities such as women writing letters, which correspondence was a very important part of everyday life back then. And then an afternoon tea party. We also have the last two here, the lamp and the fitting. So the lamp looks like to be part of a social engagement here. And then the fitting, which is something that men would not have access to, is a woman, a seamstress, fitting another woman to prepare her clothes to be properly worked on there. So the prints were very well received, with the artist Camille Pizarro having written of them, "The result is admirable, as beautiful as Japanese work." So it was a great compliment for Cassatt's prints to be compared to Japanese art at the time, especially when they were a tremendous inspiration to her. So she, along with many other artists, has seen the exhibition of Japanese woodblock prints at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris the year before in 1890. So here's an example. This was actually shown at the exhibition in Japan. And you can see where she drew inspiration from. This is Takashima Ohisa using two mirrors to observe her coiffure, which is her hairstyle, night of the Asakusa Marketing Festival. So this is from 1795, but these prints caught on later on in Europe. And so there is this huge movement of Japanese art into Europe. And if you know other Impressionist art, you'll see a lot of them are very inspired by it. So Cassatt was immediately drawn to this style of art and decided to create her series of prints after seeing the exhibition. From the prints, there were similarities she liked to display in her own work, such as close-up or cropped images of women enjoying everyday activities. The Japanese woodblock prints also focus on precise, strong line work, a skill Cassatt vastly improved upon by learning etching and printmaking, a flattening of space, and bold blocks of color. So when we look back on Cassatt's prints, we can see these features appearing in her art. So she was attracted to this, but instead decided to use a more muted color palette, more pastel tone, which was a better fit for her subjects. So we can see not all that similar from that one there, or dissimilar. Currently, these prints and variations of them can be found throughout many museums' collections. And because Cassatt hand-colored each print, no two were exactly the same. So when researching this, I found a number of prints that popped up on different museums' websites. It was interesting to see the differences in color. So this was one of my favorites called Feeding the Ducks, which I thought was really cute. So she made different versions of this. This one was made in 1894, so the Metropolitan Museum of Art has this in their collection. So look at the difference in color from this to this one here. So this is the following year, 1895. And this is at the Art Institute of Chicago. And then we have this one here, which is in Berlin, made the following year as well. So it's nice because each museum kind of has their own unique work out of the set, even though they're all the same image. I do like the lighter one here first, but interesting color choices that she picked in these. So previously, I mentioned that Cassatt exhibited with the Impressionists until 1886. It was during the mid-1880s that the group of artists had started to separate from each other as each painter pursued their own increasingly different artistic interest. At this point, Cassatt decided it would be best for her to work on her own, and she started to slowly move away from the Impressionist style. She realized then that she did not want to be confined by any classifications when it came to her art. This perspective allowed her to focus more on her subjects and in the process of creating art in general. Her art became increasingly realistic, again, but she did continue to use lighter color palettes while depicting the charming domestic scenes she was known for. Although the Impressionists had officially disbanded, many of the artists still remain in communication with each other after the 1880s. Cassatt kept in contact regularly with Degas through his life until his death in 1917. I think that in itself speaks volumes about her dedication to her friend and peer, because if you are familiar with Degas, you may know he was not the easiest person to get along with, and I'll go into that in my lecture in June when I do a talk about him. So though he was, of course, extremely talented and admired as an accomplished and dedicated artist, he was also considered, among other things, rude, stubborn, harsh, and patronizing. Cassatt was also very headstrong, and there were periods when the two artists would have intense disagreements and would not see each other for months at a time. An example was the Dreyfus affair. That was a major dispute between not just her and Degas, but Degas and a bunch of other Impressionist artists. So Cassatt found joy in proving Degas wrong or annoying him occasionally. In one instance, Degas said to Cassatt, "What do women know about style?" I think she took it as a personal challenge and decided to create a work of art where the subject was not traditionally beautiful, but the painting was done so well that he would have no choice to admire it. The masterfully done painting, titled "Girl Arranging Her Hair," was shown at the Impressionist exhibition of 1886 and was immediately purchased by Degas. So, you know, when I was researching about them, it was said that he would get upset at her when he couldn't find any faults in her work. And she was like, really? Just because? It just seemed kind of absurd to her. But she wasn't afraid to butt heads with him, which is, I think, why they were able to get along so well, too. So though Cassatt was occasionally frustrated with Degas, she never stopped seeing the attraction and talent embodied in his art. So Cassatt worked hard to make Degas and the other Impressionists known in the United States, where they were virtually unheard of during that time. Luckily, she had assistance in the French art dealer and gallery owner, Paul Durand-Ruel. He was very familiar with all the Impressionists. Here's a painting of him by Renoir, circa 1910. So Cassatt had a professional relationship with Durand-Ruel before showing her prints at his gallery in Paris in 1891. In 1885, Durand-Ruel was invited to New York after Cassatt had put in a good word for him through her friend Louisine Havemeyer. So the following year, there was an exhibition of Impressionist art, including some works by Cassatt, and around 50 works were purchased. After that, Impressionist exhibitions opened in other major metropolitan cities, and the artists gained more and more recognition in the States. So they're finally catching on here. Aside from promoting the Impressionists, Cassatt was instrumental in building the art collections of the United States, notably the Metropolitan Museum of Art, by urging American art collectors, many of whom were her wealthy friends and acquaintances, to purchase artwork by the old masters and Impressionists. One of Cassatt's conditions in providing her expertise to the buyers was that they bequeath their purchased artwork to a museum at the time of their death. So when her lifelong friend, the wealthy philanthropist, art collector, and feminist Louisine Havemeyer, which she is here, and her daughter Electra. So when Louisine died in 1929, she left the majority of her and her husband's art collection, so almost 2,000 works of art valued in the millions of dollars back then. So you can just guess what they're worth now, right? So she left them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Here's a newspaper article at the time. Says, sugar refiner's widow bequeaths collection of Rembrandts, Monets, Corot's, and Millets to museum are among most valuable in existence. And you see Degas' name there as well. So Cassatt had been a trusted advisor to the Havemeyers while they were building this collection, and through her recommendation, they purchased a fairly large amount of works by Cassatt's Impressionist peers. It's interesting to note that before she married the sugar industrialist Henry O. Havemeyer, Louisine became Degas' first American patron by purchasing a pastel by him at Cassatt's suggestion. So Cassatt had originally met Louisine in Paris in 1874. And I believe she was about 11 years older than her. So Louisine really looked up to her and valued her advice. So though Cassatt and Degas had spent much time in each other's company, it seemed they genuinely cared for each other, but there is no indication that the two were ever romantically involved. Curiously, Cassatt burned a lot of her correspondence, and so we may never know the absolute truth, but the majority of art historians believe their relationship was purely platonic, and there is no evidence to suggest otherwise. So, which brings a question to mind. Were Cassatt's drawings and paintings of mothers and children a way for her to live this type of life through her art, through interactions she herself did not have, but rather observed? Was this something she craved, even after she had convinced herself that marrying and having a family would hinder her career as an independent artist? Perhaps, but she leaves no indication that she lived a life of regret. Cassatt lived her life the way she wanted to. She proved the detractors wrong, working hard to become the independent artist she wanted to be from such a young age. Cassatt thoroughly enjoyed living abroad, and after living in Paris for 20 years, she purchased a chateau in northern France. It's a really wonderful accomplishment that she became so successful that she could afford this gigantic home in the northern part of France while still keeping a home and studio in Paris at the same time. So she would travel back and forth to both locations thereafter. And the 1890s were actually a pretty productive decade during her career. So during this time, aside from creating the beautiful series of Japanese-inspired prints, she painted such well-known works as The Boating Party and The Child's Bath, which I really love this piece here. Cassatt worked on art throughout her life, continuously creating throughout the end of the 19th century and well into the 20th century. She unfortunately was forced to stop painting after losing her eyesight in 1914. She had cataract. She did try to have eye surgery to correct it, but unfortunately the surgeries were just not successful. So she was pretty much, unfortunately, blind at that point. Cassatt died on June 14, 1926, near Paris, and is buried near her chateau in northern France. She was 82 years old. So though Cassatt opted not to have a family, her legacy lives on through the hundreds of works of art that she created, which I believe was over 300 paintings alone. Evidence to her life, committed to a devotion of her craft. Currently, Cassatt's art can be found in the collections of such prominent museums as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of course, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, amongst many others. Has anyone here seen Cassatt's paintings in person? Where's your favorite place to see them? Dion, nice. Okay, very nice. Anyone recommend an institution I could visit to view some of her works? Boston Museum of Fine Arts, perfect. Well, thank you so much for listening to my talk on the wonderful Mary Cassatt. And please join us for next month's book club. So this will be on the first Wednesday, April 3rd, presented by Preston before he jets off for his vacation. This will be 9:30 to 10:30, and the book is The Last Masterpiece by Laura Morelli, which I believe involves some artwork that was stolen and recovered during World War II. So please join Preston for that next week, and I'll be here if anyone wants to talk about the book. Thank you very much.